Welcome back to the Clear Admit MBA Admissions Podcast. I'm your host, Graham Richmond, and I'm joined by co-host Alex Brown for another edition, actually the 10th edition now, of Wiretaps. Alex, welcome back to Wiretaps. How's your week been going?
It's very good and excited to get going again with Wiretaps.
So, as usual, Alex has selected 4 candidates that we're going to review during the course of this podcast. And our hope is that, the advice we give those candidates is obviously useful to them and as well as to all of our listeners. Before we get to that, I just wanted to mention that there's some great stuff, as usual, happening over at clearadmit.com. I think we mentioned in our last episode that we've kicked off our Week Ahead series. It's a post that we run every Monday that tells you everything you need to know about the week ahead in terms of deadlines, places where you should be scheduling interviews, and everything else that you'd want to know in the MBA admissions universe. We also ran a good admissions tip recently about 3 ways to show an MBA program that you mean business and that you're, kind of serious about your relationship with them, if you will. So like how to convince a school that that you only have eyes for them kind of thing. So check that out as well. And, the biggest news, I guess, is that with people starting to apply as we're really in deadline season now for round 1, there's been some activity over on Livewire where people are kind of indicating that they've submitted apps, and stay tuned there because there's going to be a lot of activity as the season heats up and people start to get interview invitations and stuff. So without further ado, Alex, let's maybe just head right on into the Wiretaps and start looking at some of these candidates.
Very good.
So our first candidate, Wiretaps candidate number 1. This person has a 720 on the GMAT and a 3.45 GPA. They've been working for 2 years at the time of posting their entry on ApplyWire, and they're located in New York, and their post-MBA location is sort of anywhere. They are currently working as a pharmaceutical sales rep, and they want to pivot over to consulting and maybe pharma, but not in a sales role. Companies that they're targeting are Bain, BCG, McKinsey, other consulting firms, ZS Associates as well. And this person's not planning on starting business school until 2022. As you can tell, they only have 2 years of work experience so far. So planning ahead, looking out into the future, and we always like to see that. I think, there were a number of questions that this person raised in their notes. And Alex, you had some discussion with them about the fact that they work in sales and sort of their whole plan here for applying to top business schools. In terms of the schools that they're specifically targeting, they've got Columbia, Cornell, Dartmouth, NYU, and Yale on their list. So what's your take on this candidate, Alex?
The candidate has some concerns about his or her candidacy, and was very frank about them, and wants to see what steps can be taken at this juncture to potentially mitigate some of these particular issues. So, on the one hand, the person's working in sales, and the perception that someone working in sales isn't necessarily set up for admissions at top-tier business schools. And we've talked about this a little bit before in Wiretaps. It's not necessarily the most sort of high-profile career, pre-MBA career for the top schools. Nevertheless, the person points out, one, it's pharmaceutical sales, which is quite a competitive sales industry, as it were, and that they're planning to actually transition to sort of inside the company in more of a marketing function for the next couple of years. And I think if they make that step, that will be very positive. I like the fact that this candidate is very self-aware in terms of identifying these potential issues and taking steps at least a couple of years out to really mitigate the issues. Another area that they identified as potentially weak is their 3.45 GPA. So a 3.45 is slightly below the average, but the candidate points out he has an upward trend, so he started off very poorly, and then consecutive years and semesters are very strong GPAs. So that was very good. That all being said, there are two really interesting aspects to this that the candidate's dealing with. One is that they plan to take additional coursework and get straight A's, which is great. Whether it's necessary or not, they're going to do it. And at the end of the day, if they do it, that can't be a bad thing.
Right. Well, they mentioned, I think, that they had studied, they're kind of an English major, and so they were worried about, like, is there enough evidence on the transcript, even though there is an upward trend on the GPA. So I think they're trying to cover their bases there, which I applaud them for doing. They have a couple of years to do it. So, yeah. So, sorry, I interrupted you, but yeah, I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, no worries. But yeah, no, I think it's a fantastic idea. And there's a mentor program that the candidate is planning to set up for slow starters, or for candidates or for people that are sort of turnaround stories for their undergraduate experience. If they do this and they get traction with it and create impact with it, I think that will be absolutely fantastic. Because again, it shows a lot of aspects of a candidacy that top business schools really like to seek. It shows self-awareness, i.e. this candidate had this particular issue and they've had to deal with it. They can then share their experiences with other candidates, so that's giving back. They can show some leadership, some mentorship, I just love this idea. So I really hope the candidate is genuine and plans to do this and plans to figure out how to do it at a good enough scale where they really do have some impact with other people. So I think that will be absolutely fantastic. I think the goals of the candidate are great. Consulting in the sort of New Jersey area, sort of staying in that sort of pharmaceutical industry, which is obviously, as we know, Graham, it's quite well concentrated in that area geographically, and long-term leadership in biotech makes perfect sense. Honestly, Graham, I really like this person. They've identified stuff, and they're going to take care of it, and that's really a good attitude to have this far out in the application cycle. So whether they're applying next year or the year after, I forget. But I mean, they're planning ahead.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I guess, at the end of the day, one of the things that was quite impressive is that they literally, they really, really tanked when they started college. They had a 2.7 in their first semester, which, not awful, but not great, obviously. And then they had literally failed the second semester, a 0 GPA. And so then they literally got, all their grades from that point on were like 4 years in a row of 3.75 or better. So I think there's that upward trend. The things that they're fighting against, I guess, are that they claim they went to a university that's not, prestigious. They studied English they started out with like a physics minor, but kind of abandoned that. So, but I think, this person has a lot of interesting, life challenges that they faced, whether it was, a rough start to college. The person became a father at some point during his college years, and because of that wanted to graduate fairly quickly, and had to abandon that, kind of physics minor or whatever it was going to be. So a lot of kind of interesting challenges working in pharmaceutical sales, as you said, not always a traditional feeder, but if they can pivot into something a little more marketing oriented, why not? And the GMAT's good. I mean, if you look at the schools on their list, I think 720 is kind of right around the average for the schools that they're targeting, which are sort of like just outside the M7, except they've got Columbia on the list. So everything makes sense to me. The one thing I was kind of wondering is, if they have a couple of years and they're going to take these classes and get A's and they're going to pivot in their work, they might end up being a stronger candidate than they're currently giving themselves credit for. And so I wondered if this guy, should he be looking at Wharton's healthcare management program as a possibility?
I was actually going to get back to you, Graham, with the question, should this person be looking at Wharton? Obviously, Duke's another example of a potential school for this person, but I would completely agree with that sentiment. If they do everything they say they're going to do, this guy, in the notes when I was preparing for this, I just wrote down and underlined, he's doing everything he can.
Right. Right. And I think the only thing that might keep Duke off the list would be, I feel like somewhere he mentioned that his wife's family and everyone is kind of Northeast and he's hoping to stay in that area. But Duke does have a great kind of healthcare, kind of offering. So in any event, yeah, I would just say, reach for the stars, like no reason not to, might want to pare down this list a little bit and think about which programs would be best suited, not just for consulting, but for kind of a healthcare bent as well. And that's why obviously Wharton comes to mind. I think Wharton is a school that, as a top school, definitely appreciates the kind of hard worker and the folks that face these kinds of challenges. So, kind of in terms of shifting a career. So I think we got kind of enough said on this guy, but I like him and I agree with you. He's doing everything possible and really asking the right questions. And so, yeah, just wish him the best of luck. Take a couple of classes, get A's, and do whatever you can to just be a solid candidate.
Great stuff.
So let's move on to Wiretap's candidate number 2. This candidate is another male candidate with a 740 on the GMAT, a 3.96 GPA, 4 years of work experience, is currently in private equity, hoping to remain there after business school, and is located in California, wants to start school next fall, and is applying to Harvard Business School and Stanford. And in his notes, he mentions that he's kind of a little bit of a farm boy, moves to the city background, but at the end of the day, he's a white male working in finance, thinks he's a strong writer, but worries that he might get lost in the stack of resumes that are similar to his own, and mentions he's only going to apply to Harvard and Stanford this round. So what do you think of this guy?
Yeah, I mean, obviously at first read, there's lots of super strong stuff here. So 396 GPA with a 740 GMAT, 4 years of experience, private equity experience. I mean, so all that stuff really checks the boxes. I'd just throw it back to you, Graham. What will exclude this guy from Harvard or Stanford or both?
I mean, my fear when I looked at this was, yeah, he ticks all the boxes in terms of the numbers. And some of this might just be that he didn't share too much with us on Applywire. But my fear was, other than maybe this farm boy to the city kind of story, I'm not seeing, like he said, like what is going to make him stand out? What are his passions or activities? Does he have a specific interest in the, with respect to his private equity work? Like, are there certain types of companies that he enjoys investing in? What does he want to do? And my fear when I saw this, and the information that he shared at least, was that here's like another PE guy that just sort of like, well, I know I need to go to a top MBA program or be a nice, feather in my cap, and I'm only willing to go if it's Harvard or Stanford, but I'll give it a shot, and but I need to stand out. And it's sort of like, well, yeah, what do you do with your probably fairly limited spare time? And yeah, I don't know if there's anything. I'm trying to think what could be in this story of moving from the farm to the to the urban areas, and whether he's learned something and wants to help other people kind of make that transition, or but again, there was something missing here in terms of like, well, what is this guy also like, I don't know, an Olympic level archer on the weekends or something? Is there something else to his candidacy that will help him to stand out? And I also think that PE is more common than it used to be. And so I think to the extent that he can show that he's got a certain type of private equity experience, that would be helpful. Like if he's really interested in healthcare or biotech or just, software or whatever it might be, that would be useful. And it's not here right now. So there needs to be more.
And quite honestly, I'd like to see the Stanford essay, what means most to this person and why, I guess. Is that what it is, Graham?
Yeah, it's what matters most to you and why, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, clearly that's important to Stanford. It's similarly important to Harvard, but it's like, what does mean most to this person, and connect the dots. I mean, if this person, went Ivy League and came out of Ivy League, went to a top consulting or banking firm, then into private equity. I mean, they're going a very similar pathway to the elite candidates pursue, and the issue will then be how does this person differentiate himself from those other elite candidates, because at the end of the day, you want some different voices in the MBA classroom. No doubt, these candidates are super strong, but you want some diversity there too. But if this candidate went to a non-elite school, yet bootstrapped that into a top consulting banking firm offer into private equity, I think that might actually be more interesting. And they've really sort of plowed their own path to really get into a top spot, which I'm assuming they're currently in. So there's that aspect, to learn a little bit more about that. And as you say, we need to know who is this person outside of work. We don't have any insight really into that aspect of their candidacy, and I would qualify myself as a bit of a farm boy, so obviously I like to see those candidates. but yeah, we can keep this one a lot shorter. I think the point is that the basic stats and profile is super strong. How do they differentiate themselves, and we need more of their personal story, I think.
Yeah, and I feel like I'm being unfair or kind of disparaging the candidacy, but it's not. I'm just saying, like, we don't really have enough data. I mean, I don't want it to be lost on anyone that a 3.96 is like incredibly impressive no matter where you go. I'm kind of like, wow, this person probably got all A's their entire college career and maybe one B. I mean, that's insane. So there's definitely a lot here, but if I were to be able to sit down and have a beer with this person, I want to know, what else do you like to do? What makes you interesting? And the only last thing I would say is I think Harvard and Stanford are really different schools. And in terms of the way that they, run their MBA programs, the way they teach, everything. And so I would encourage this candidate to get very, very familiar with both programs in order to be convincing about their need to attend. Because otherwise it could, again, feel like, oh, PE guy wanting to go to one of the best, doesn't care which one it is. And so I think, just figure out what it is that makes each program tick as you head into their application process, and that'll help you quite a bit. So, but as you said, not a lot to say beyond that because we didn't get a lot of data on this candidate. So let's move on to Wiretap's candidate number 3. This person has a 770 on the GMAT and a 3.5 GPA, 5 years of work experience, located in the U.S., had been working in kind of audit and operations work, and is hoping to is hoping to pivot over to consulting with like McKinsey or maybe an Oliver Wyman, some other, there's other boxes ticked here too. Wants to start school in the fall of 2020, is targeting Harvard, Kellogg, UCLA, and Wharton. And what's interesting about this candidate is she actually explains that she was working in audit for 2.5 years and got promoted early, and then left shortly thereafter to work in a recruiting firm, and is kind of interested in, the kind of HR, I guess sort of HR sector, and helping to use kind of analytics in that domain, so kind of people analytics. And it's a niche field, as she points out, but she's hoping to use the MBA to get exposed to real life scenarios and new methodologies and things. So, and to get out of, the bubble, I guess, of her current, company and exposure. So, interesting, Canada. We don't see a lot of people who have worked in, kind of recruitment or headhunting, HR related areas, nor do we see a ton with interest in that post MBA. So what was your take on this candidate?
Very strong candidate for sure.
Yeah.
She started off in audit. Audit's not the sexiest sort of field to be in for a top tier MBA candidate. Not there's anything wrong with it, but it's typically not perceived as the greatest spot to develop. But nevertheless, she did very well there, promoted early. Only person in the past decade, she noted, that was promoted early. And in ops, she did very well there, and the company scaled in a different company and so on and so forth. So this is someone that looks to have had serious impact where she's been. Has identified a niche she's super interested in, and we chatted about this just before we're recording this session, Graham, because I asked you to explain to me a little bit about what she wants to do, because and I only we laugh about it a little bit, but this sort of workforce analytics and people analytics, these are reasonably new fields. Obviously, any kind of data analytics related areas are reasonably new. So you just want to make sure as a candidate you explain it well, what you plan to do and why you plan to do it, and so on and so forth, which I'm sure this candidate will. I was very bullish about this candidate. One of the questions I had for her, actually, in my response, she's applying to Harvard, Kellogg, Anderson, and Wharton, and her school choice was, I thought, a little bit, I'm not saying unorthodox, but obviously she's got Harvard, Kellogg, and Wharton right at the top, and then Anderson, which is a very good program, what I would call a top 16 program, but there's a gap of schools between Anderson and the other three mentioned, and it became quite clear that it's a geographic issue. She wants to end up back on the West Coast, in LA, I guess, but certainly back on the West. Oh, she's LA based currently, so there. So I was like, well, you might want to consider Haas, but you also might want to consider Stanford. I mean, I don't see why a candidate like this, who has had great impact at work, really seems to know what she wants to do. I think she should take a punt at Stanford. What do you think, Graham?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, first thing I want to say is, you're kind of pulling back the veil. I think we wanted people to think that we don't even discuss these before we get onto the podcast here, but,
Oh, yeah, of course we do, Graham.
I know.
Otherwise, I wouldn't know what I'm talking about.
But in any event, no, I think you're right. I mean, look at the numbers are pretty fantastic. And, that kind of GMAT score is not, it's not commonly seen. And obviously, I agree. Like, why not take a look at Stanford? I love the kind of HR or people analytics focus. I also think it's a field that resonates well with the admissions readers, because admissions officers, that's what they do for a living, right? They're in recruitment effectively, right? They're selecting people for their programs. And it's not uncommon, as I mentioned to you earlier, that, a lot of admissions officers end up moving into kind of executive recruitment roles or HR roles if they leave the business school universe. So I think she can talk about this and get admissions readers excited about it. I feel like I see an article every week or so about how, Google or Amazon or these companies are using kind of it's almost like a Moneyball approach to figuring out, which employees are going to do the best work for them and how to make the, better hiring decisions. So it's a hot field. I think there's a lot of opportunity. And the other thing I liked about her is because she worked in audit and I think has a business kind of undergrad, there's going to be no question, as you might sometimes find with someone in a more recruitment or HR type role, there's going to be no questions about like, well, will she be able to handle the quantitative rigor of an MBA program? That's often a question that people have. For anyone working on like marketing or anything HR or recruiting, that's always a question, right? But I think she ticks the box there too. So now she is an Asian female green card holding, came to the U.S. for college and has a green card, she mentioned. But, I guess that's a slightly more competitive group. But I still think she, rises to the top even in that kind of a group. I guess the other thing was that you asked her a little bit about extracurriculars. She's done some sports. And did you feel that she ticks the box there as well?
Yeah, it's just not clear to me if she's doing anything currently. So she says good extracurriculars, spent a lot of time in a sports league as both a player, a coach for junior team, and head of committee. So that obviously, being a player, that's all about talent. So that's very good. But being a coach and a head of a committee, those are the sort of things that AdCom are really going to be very interested in. What would be interesting, I think, more so is if she's still doing that as a coach, as a head of committee, or if she's not, is she doing anything else other than obviously performing very, very well at work?
I think my suspicion is that she's still doing that stuff, because I'm guessing when she says a sports league, it's probably some kind of local league for young professionals or something that are So I feel like that. Yeah, maybe if it is current, she's in good shape, is my view.
I agree. It is current. She's in great shape, and it's sort of a nice sort of counterbalance to what she's doing at work. So yeah, I really would encourage this candidate to take a hard look at that first essay of Stanford's, and if she thinks she can address it effectively, look there as well. And you do actually remind me, I know this is a little off topic, but I mentioned that she should look at Haas too, and it is, I forget, the guy at Haas that was actually in a PDP program I used to teach. He left Haas to join a headhunting company sort of thing. So as you were mentioning, a lot of AdCom people do move in that direction. So they should know about this kind of work.
Yeah, definitely. All right. So yeah, best of luck to her, and thanks for, always appreciate these great posts. And I failed to mention that our first Wiretaps candidate today was really complimentary about what we're doing here with the podcast, and that's we really appreciate that. Love hearing the feedback, and just it's nice to know that folks are tuning in and getting something out of this. So let's move on to Wiretaps. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
And anyone that's complimentary, sorry, Graham. Anyone that's complimentary, we're obviously going to feature them because we like people that like us. So, it's just a virtuous circle.
Right. So let's move on to Wiretaps candidate number 4. So this person is not looking to start until 2021. So they have another year before they're going to be working on their applications in great detail. They have a 3.7 GPA and 2.5 years of work experience. They are currently, it's funny, for their pre-MBA career, they mentioned their undergraduate experience, which was a BA in international business. But we later learned in the comments that they're working in kind of a, sort of like retail, but more like foreign trade management. So doing projects that involve what sounds like, a lot of sort of trade, kind of import, export, whatever it is in that domain. And they're hoping post-MBA to get into consulting, or maybe even consumer goods, or potentially even entrepreneurship. So they have a lot of potential possibilities. And the companies that they have on their current radar are Bain, Booz Allen, BCG, and McKinsey. And the location is also a little bit all over the map in terms of where they might want to end up. They indicate Boston, San Francisco, Mexico City, or London. And I should note that this person currently is in Mexico, and has worked a little bit in the U.S., but mostly it sounds like they're from Mexico, is my guess, based on what they said here. And the schools that they're targeting: Cambridge, Cornell, HEC, INSEAD, LBS, MIT, Oxford, Chicago, and Yale. So what do you make of this candidate?
I think this is a classic case of someone, again, earlier in the application cycle. So they're not applying this season, but potentially next season, I think. That needs to spend some time now really focusing on their goals, their plan, what they plan to do, and so on and so forth, to fine-tune that aspect of their candidacy before they ultimately apply in another year or so's time. So, and I'll quote from the notes section that clearly sort of signals this. Consulting attracts me most since I believe it will allow me impact the lives of thousands of people by improving the companies we solve problems for, which is very laudable and completely understandable. But I think, there needs to be a better focus in terms of what they plan to do, not only in the short term, i.e. going into consulting directly out of the MBA, but what are the long-term aspirations of this candidate? Where do they see themselves in 10 years' time? That really needs to be well answered before they pull the trigger on their candidacy.
Yeah, and I felt like the consulting comment, I get that consulting's a great post-MBA career because it allows you to test out a lot of the things that you've learned in business school and give you a range of exposure. But if you're a consultant working for McKinsey on a project for Dell or something, helping them to streamline their operation when it comes to cutting cost out of building laptops or something, I think it's a bit of a stretch to say that you're helping thousands of people around the world. Like you're not doing humanitarian work. It's interesting work. And I think it's, for the reasons I said, it's a great way to post MBA stretch out. But yeah, this person, I agree with you, clearly at the early stages of figuring out the career plan.
Yeah. And another aspect here, they said their extracurriculars are currently weak. They're not doing anything, I guess. I don't have many extracurricular activities, but in university I was part of a dance club, went to competitions and so forth. So, without being cynical in terms of approaching the application, the person has another year before they need to be applying, they probably could step back into that situation. Or, if dance is something they're still passionate about, do something in that field over the next year to get more involved in maybe some teaching capacity or coaching capacity or something like that, to give back to something that they're passionate about. I wouldn't do it simply for the application, although obviously I'm saying do it for the application, but pick something that really interests you, you're really passionate about, get involved, and basically you need a platform in the applications that shows who you are outside of work and sort of as a multidimensional individual. So it's definitely worth exploring that again, I think.
Yeah, and I think they have a reasonable kind of, I don't know if excuse is the right word, but if you look at their career path, they did this sort of 6-month project for the Investment and Trade Agency of Mexico, and in that project, they helped a specific company, which ended up hiring them and making them, I think they said, that they were so successful that they're now the foreign trade manager for this company. And so they've clearly had like some pretty interesting leadership and kind of workplace growth that likely took up a lot of their time. And so diving back into dance or whatever, this person is passionate about would be fine. And they could indicate even in an optional essay, or if it comes up, if it's appropriate, they could just say, I was, working, 70-hour weeks and absolutely all in at work, which paid off. But then now that I'm settled in, I've gone back into some of the activities that I love doing with my spare time. So yeah, I just think rekindling that stuff, as you said, is a great idea.
Yeah, very good. And obviously, I think they've still got to take the standardized test, so the GMAT or GRE. As all other top candidates, preparing very well. And getting your best score. Probably try to take it sooner than later in case, a high percentage of candidates have taken it more than once, right? So you just got to be fully aware of that. What about their school choice? I think it's a symptom of, again, being early in the process, Graham. Wouldn't you agree?
Right. And because, I would say on the one hand, you'd say, gosh, there are a lot of the very best schools in Europe on this list. Cambridge, Oxford, INSEAD, LBS, HEC, these are the very best programs in Europe. And then on the US side, they've got Cornell and Booth and Yale and MIT. So arguably, again, some of the really top schools in the US. But I was kind of trying to figure out where do they want to be? If they could really figure out their career plan and know that I got to be in London, then that would dictate a certain type of school selection. Whereas if they know that they're likely to end up in Mexico or in the US working with Mexico, then suddenly the school selection might be quite different. And maybe there's even a UT Austin that comes into the picture, or other schools that, have strengths and maybe have a large networks in, Mexico City, where this person indicates as a potential target. So yeah, I just felt like I'm not going to poo-poo their school selection, because those are all great schools. It's just that without knowing what they want to do, it becomes more challenging. And I think, if the idea is to go to Europe because going to Europe would be fun for a year or two and, open up new doors or something, I'm not so sure, if they have a specific career goal in mind that doesn't involve Europe directly, then that would be foolish. Although I do see that, they've done some work with Germany based on their, kind of on the, I guess, something to do with trade with Germany and Mexico. So, there could be a legitimate reason that all these European schools are on the list, and that's fine. It'd be nice for them to figure out and take. It's just rare to see people apply to so many schools in both markets.
Yeah, and I would say, just to wrap things up, kudos to this candidate and our first candidate, who are looking, a year or two down the road for their applications and seeking advice now, and they have time, like in the first candidate's case, to address some issues that they feel uncomfortable with, and to really put together a strong application for top schools. And then in the case of this candidate, really starting to think through more seriously about their goals and recognizing the importance of having that focus to then help drive their school selection and other aspects of their candidacy, and potentially getting back into sort of, some volunteer activities that may again help further bolster their candidacy. And then the two candidates, the second and third candidates that we looked at, clearly in both cases, I think, Graham, it's fair to say they're potential superstars on paper. They just need to execute well in their applications, and they should have some terrific options.
Agreed. Yeah. So great group again this week. And, I just want to encourage everyone who enjoys this podcast to take the time to write a review, whether it's on the Apple Podcasts platform or wherever you listen. Not only do those reviews help Alex and I get up each day and make more of these podcasts, but it helps other people to discover this. I mean, that's the main thing. And so even just rating the podcast helps us a lot, and makes it just allows other people to discover what we're doing here. So we appreciate everyone tuning in. There are a bunch of other podcasts on tap, including more episodes of Wiretaps, of course, and also some fun interviews that I've been conducting with admissions folks. So stay tuned. As always, subscribe to the podcast, and we'll be back really soon. Alex, thanks so much for your time and for, as always, selecting a great group of Wiretaps candidates.
Great. Thanks for having me again, Graham, and really enjoying it.
All right. We'll see you soon, everybody.
Take care.